spiritual data is a it's a nonprofit that is attempting to determine what is true or not, um, in a very general sense, and we're f focused on especially controversial questions like metaphysical questions, spiritual questions, um, but also questions like about psychology and the mind, consciousness, mental health. Uh, like there's and because we're attacking metaphysics, it also brings in physics and quantum physics and uh, even biology and tons of things. Kind of we have to have this multidisciplinary understanding of various fields of science, and so that's why our focus is on the methods of determining what is true, like and uh, epistemology, which is about like the scientific method and like how you can know what is true or not. So that's that's what spiritual data is in a sense. And my background's in AI and computational linguistics, so we're using AI in order to go through tons of data, since that's necessary to have these broad conclusions. Yeah.
Right, so now that there's another curious question on my end, because I want to understand your perspective, what made you pick all these sort of topics like quantum physics, metaphysics, philosophy, these kinds of let's say medium of study. Of course, for other people, it draws out interest, curiosity, but for some, some people have limited mindset on this. So, for example, like a person like you, how were you able to? What made you become interested in these kinds of, ideas, topics for the people to
Yeah.
understand?
My interest came from uh, leaving a religion. So I was in a religion that was like um, it's sort of um, in some people's definition it was cult, in the sense of like um, it was um, considered like bad and to or sent to like look at information that contradicts the religion, and so you sort of like grew up in a mind bubble that I didn't realize. It's like it's not like I only talked to people in religion and like I saw stuff online, but I didn't like I always had that confirmation bias of like this religion is true, because that's like I had so many experiences, like positive experiences in religion, that it just all felt right to me. And so I just kind of went off of that. Um, and like everyone around me, not everyone, but a lot of people around me were like also believing religion. So, and like the doctrine made sense to me, those kind of things. So anyway, that's at some point, um, I learned that there's like tons of evidence that it was just made up, basically. So that kind of like led me to, yeah, that led me to like, well, that was like my reality crashed down. Like I was like, okay, um, what, like, why is it that, I mean, two things. Like one, um, I I'd spent my life like dedicating to this religion, and like it affected my life decisions in many ways, um, that no longer make sense. And then secondly, I learned as I started looking online for like objective evidence of spiritual questions, I found that there was like near-death experience studies and like other research, like other in people's experiences and out-of-body experiences and things like that, that was like reasonably persuasive, both on an individual like people's accounts um, side, and then also on in terms of science, like. And so I was surprised I didn't know about this before, or that I had ignored it at least. And so I was like, okay, like why is it that there's all this research that's been done on that relates to spiritual questions that I didn't know about and that most people just like ignore out of hand. So that's when I became, I became passionate about determining what is true. And with like my background data science, numbers, like I like numbers, and so I was like, okay, I want to have a um well, when I say I like numbers, it's like I have this belief that anything can be turned into numbers because that's just how computational linguistics works. You turn words into numbers, right? So I was like, okay, and it's just like I just wanted to see what is most likely true. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna aggregate evidence for and against each question. Like even if the evidence isn't very good, like well, at least it's some evidence. It's all relative, right? Like okay, you know, this the problem is that I think in society we just kind of like um how do I say like we if we think the evidence isn't very good for something, then we assume that there's better evidence on the other side, which is not necessarily true. Like we assume that there's good evidence for the side for the conclusion that most people believe in, which is often not the case. So that's this part of the struggle and why well the scientific community has gotten a little off the rails because there's this like strong ingrained belief among scientists that
Yeah.
you can only study, you can only apply science to the physical, uh, and that only the physical can be real. Um, so even though there's a lot of evidence to the contrary, so that's where I'm coming at. Yeah, the sort of long answer to that question.
No, it's brilliant. My next question would, because I was listening to everything that you have said. Um, how close are we to the truth with all of this evidence approach objectively? We have gathered lots of research, hypothesis, and anyone who would have access to the website, the spiritual data website. There are lots of journals, research. How close are we to the spiritual truth that we started,
I would say that we're far and close at the same time.
or and close at the
Like,
same time?
yeah, I mean, uh, because the algorithm's still in development, uh, and the main thing is we have planned application, um, a
Mm-hmm.
prototype to application of this technology for mental health.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a separate topic we can delve into later. But the the thing is that we're building an algorithm, and
Mm-hmm.
so once the algorithm works well, then it doesn't take long to apply it to the data, right? So it's at the same time, there's also a lot of work to be done on gathering data. And so it's going to start on specific questions and specific data that we have. And then we'll broaden that to more subjects and more data. So it will improve over time. I think it is a long-term project in terms of have it reliable conclusions that the skeptics, can take seriously. But
Yeah.
it has a clear path to get there, I would say. And that's an important thing. And it's so important that and impactful. But like it doesn't matter whether it takes, 1 year or even 10 years. Like this can like it can change the world once we get to that reliability. Um, but I don't think it's going to take 10 years. I think it's more
Mhm.
like at maybe a few years to really like um have a reliable conclusions. And even within 1 year, we can have we can demonstrate its value and like how it's able to do better than current AI models and on certain topics and things like that. So um, yeah, so I think we'll get there um, quick, fast enough is what I would say.
So for the future watchers, or whoever's going to see this, for them to understand, since we are talking about algorithms and technological aspects, can you describe how exactly this technology works that gives you answers on the spiritual research, spiritual truths? As we're talking about algorithms, 'cause it may be too technical for some. How can we explain it easier?
Yeah. The key is that we're going one by one through the data. Like, so just imagine that you as a researcher or as an individual want to know whether a specific hypothesis is true or research question. So you say, okay, I want to know whether um, we have some spiritual uh, form after, like, without a body, okay?
Yeah.
Like after we die. So then you have that as hypothesis. We convert that hypothesis into a set of concepts and relationships and a knowledge graph. So we say, okay, like there's a concept of having a spirit body, and it might have these other contextual factors. There's a concept of like not being with your physical body, and so then we take the data and we say, okay, um, imagine that you were to manually go through every research paper and every experience of an individual and determine like whether it's like that is evidence for or against that hypothesis, or not, or in some cases it just may be irrelevant. So that's going to take a very long time. Uh, so that's why we're using AI to go through that data one by one and say, okay, like this um, is evidence for it for this reason, and it's like this is evidence that there maybe this concept of spirit body is real. This is evidence that it may not be real, that it could be explained by something else. So you just weigh that evidence, and eventually you you start having like reasonable conclusions, um, just based on the large body of evidence. And then as an individual, then you can go back and look at the data that the AI has gathered and has found particularly reliable on both sides. And you say, okay, well, this paper like had very clear evidence, but this paper had evidence against. Let's compare the two. Like, and etc. And same thing with individuals' firsthand accounts of experiences, which I think could be just as important. And the tricky thing is, of course, like to what extent can we trust people's accounts? That's also an important part of the algorithm, and making sure it's basically about like how we analyze it, like how we apply critical thinking.
Mhm.
So what we're doing here is automating critical thinking and saying, okay, like could this have just been their interpretation? What are aspects of the experience that likely weren't just their interpretation, but that are core to reality? So that's what we're also attempting to parse out. Um, yeah.
So, for example, since you have started spiritual data, right, and we're running down on 7 minutes less, the timer
I
with
actually have just like 1 minute. So
yeah,
maybe last question.
yeah. So for the last question, so is there, for example, let's just give them an example. So, is there a particular topic that you have worked on and have interviewed people, sets of them, and have actually what do you say, connected connected correlations between the results based on your interviews or your research? Is there a particular topic, their perspectives on it?
Are there particular people that have interviewed um, in relation to what?
Is there a specific topic, for example, like, I don't know, NDEs, and then after that their experiences with NDEs after result. When I said about correlation, it's like their experiences are somehow connected. Same experiences, or does it differ, or
Or are you saying like?
Mm.
for people's individual experiences, what
Yeah,
have I noticed in
yeah.
terms of, yeah, I actually wrote a paper about doing a systematic review of near-death experience research in various cultures. Um, so uh I mean what I found is that, I mean, the main thing I found in that paper and that review was that different studies apply different methods, and that kind of makes it challenging to compare. And that's one advantage of our approach is that we can apply the same method to all data. Uh, but um, I would say that and other people have done. There's tons of research I would say on this, like finding correlations, similarities among near-death experiences. But you can look up Jeffrey Long, for example. But um, I would say that there are some things that do appear to be more core to the experience that are not necessarily talked about so much. For example, um, this the fact that our expectations and like uh, our culture and kind of like yeah our mind, the context that our mind is coming from, like where our consciousness is positioned, which is our expectations, part of our beliefs, like that affects what our experience is outside of the physical body, right? Like that itself is a hypothesis, and that I've seen uh, evidence for, across different experiences. And so, and that was one of the conclusions of my paper was like, okay, like what are the things that are core across cultures, um, that we could at least suggest, and spiritual data's technology is going to help determine how, give us a statistical probability basically for how likely that is true or not. But that's the main conclusion I would say is just that, yeah, like our expectations, are like things like that are going to affect what we experience. And now a lot of people would just take that as like, okay, like that means that it was just all in our brain. Um, it's like, well, why does that mean that it's all in our brain? Like, you know, I think like there's so much evidence that like near-death experiences report something real, like like learning the information like that they wouldn't have known, and like being able to verify things and all these things um it could have a separate discussion on, but given that there is evidence that near death experiences are real, and out of body experiences are real, and so many people are verified. So to me, like that's given that, then um the fact that the experiences differ so much and seem to be related to the context of the individual, that implies, and people who have these experiences, like out of body experiences, also report that, um, like what they what they think about an experience, like often immediately happens. Like okay, I want to be there. I'm there. So like what? Yeah. So it's going to affect the experience. Like your consciousness is going to affect what you experience. Like people, and your emotions, and so consciousness is a messy thing, um, and we're not necessarily aware of all that's influencing our experience. And even in the physical reality, our perception is affected by our consciousness and what we focus on, what our expectations are. So I would say it applies in physical reality, it applies in non-physical reality. Um, Really, you could even say that physical reality and non-physical reality are both, like there's no distinction. Like physical reality is non-physical. Uh, and like it's just about like where our conscious focus is. Like right now, I'm consciously focused on perceptions of my body.
Mm-hmm.
Other times, I may not be. So that was again maybe a longer than necessary answer, but that's my perspective based on what I've seen.
Well,
Yep.
I appreciate this conversation that we had. It's very much informative. So probably the next time that we do another version of this, let's talk about intellectual humility. What do you think?
Oh, that sounds great. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.